All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about the concept of what I call path multiplicity, right? So that's basically the idea that you can have multiple subconscious paths, right, related to your transcendental performance charge, right? And so to go over this first point, it says modeling transcendental performance after a single subconscious path is generally unrealistic. Right, so we've been really just talking about transcendental performance in terms of a single subconscious path, right? And we talked about that with the idea of dance moves or a song that you're singing, right? You feel compulsion to perform or sing the song or perform dance moves. Generally, that's a single, you could kind of say that's close to a single subconscious path. But for other activities, which we've also talked about others, a single path is unrealistic. That's why I didn't go into too much detail about the connection between them and paths. So I want to now talk about that in this video. So why is a single subconscious path generally unrealistic? Well, the reason has to do with the second point, and that's the fact that the subconscious generally has a much harder time recognizing activity compared to a subject or category, right? So remember what we talked about in the last video. So when your subconscious recalls or accesses a subconscious memory, right, it is the parameter which determines which subconscious memory gets accessed, or the parameters are not just the subject, but also the activity, right? Now, we could even go further if we want to, because you could even say an activity is actually an extension of the subject or category, right? And we could go further. We could say the subject or in the activity. We could say the environment too, or any time of day that you normally do. We can keep going. But for me, I think it's good enough to just talk about the subject, the category, or activity. I don't think that making other parameters of specification for the degree, how a subconscious memory is accessed is necessary, right? It's like too specific, right? You can pretty much get away with just talking about the subject or the category and the activity. But so the closer the subject is to the main subject that you are focused on when you are originally charging a subconscious path, the more your subconscious will access that particular subconscious path, and you'll feel that compulsion at full strength, right? But it's not just the subject or category, also the activity, right? So the closer the activity is also to the activity you were performing when you were originally charging the subconscious path, that also determines the degree to which the subconscious path is accessed, right? So obviously, to maximize your transcendental performance charge, you want to recall or access that subconscious path at full power, right? So you want it to be called at the highest level of strength, which is basically always going to be the case if you just focus on the exact same subject or category and the exact same activity that you charged the original subconscious path in, right? So we talked about that last video. But there's a problem there's a kind of problem that arises in the process or the effort of trying to achieve that, right? The subject, like I said, the subject it's pretty easy for the subconscious to recognize subjects or categories. And that's why we really talked about that primarily in chapter 9 and 10, and we didn't really go over this other stuff about activity. However, like we just said, the activity also determines the degree to which a subconscious path is called. But the subconscious has a much harder time recognizing the activity compared to the subject. So that's important because what that means is that when we're performing an activity, we now have to be concerned about how our subconscious is recognizing that activity, because that determines the degree to which the subconscious path is called, or the strength at which it's called, right? So as an example, let's say I'm playing basketball, right? Now, to the conscious mind, if I'm playing basketball, it doesn't matter what angle or what circumstance I'm playing basketball in, whether I'm at the 2-point line or the 3-point line, or I'm playing defense on this side of the court or that side of the court, whether I'm doing a pick and roll, no matter what I'm doing, no matter what play I'm doing from the coach, everything I'm doing, right, looks like the activity of playing basketball to the conscious mind. But the subconscious is not like that at all, right? So to the subconscious, right, shooting a 3-point shot could be perceived as playing basketball, or it could be perceived as the original activity that I charge the subconscious path in, right? Let's say I charge a subconscious path to help me make three-point shots. Now, the moment I start playing defense, now the activity looks completely different, right? So you have to think in terms of how the activity looks to the subconscious. Shooting a three-pointer looks nothing like playing defense or trying to steal the ball. But you want to have a subconscious path to help you with this activity for each of these circumstances, right? All of these activities collectively make up the activity of playing basketball, right? So how do I solve this problem? If let's say I charge a single subconscious path to help me with three-point shots in the activity of basketball, what am I going to do when I have to play defense, right? Or steal the ball, right? Or try to block a shot, right? That path that helped me to shoot a three-pointer is not going to help me in that situation, nor will my subconscious call that path, because that situation looks nothing like the activity of shooting a three-pointer. However, like we said, all of that collectively is still the activity of playing basketball, at least to the conscious mind. So we basically have to now solve this problem where the activity of basketball looks very different from different angles or different situations or circumstances to the subconscious. And we want to make sure that we want to try to do something where the activity always looks the same to our subconscious, right? So that way we can always have a subconscious path charged to allow us to perform in a transcendental way, right? So that's a problem, right? That's a charging problem. And the solution to that is actually what I say here. So let me just go read this. Actually, I'm making an analogy about the solution. So the solution is similar to the one used when storing biometric data. So basically, if you have a job or if you're storing information on your phone to like unlock it for whatever reason, maybe an app or just to unlock the phone in general. Actually, I don't know how it works with the phone because I've never done it. But when I'm at work, right, so I've had a job where I have to use my thumb to punch in for my shift, right? And so when I'm originally storing information to the database to register my fingerprint, right, I'll put my thumb on some scanner, right, and some light or red light, I imagine, goes across, and it stores my data, right? It stores my biometric data related to my thumb. But what's interesting is that it asks me to lift my thumb and then place it on again. Now, why does it do that? There's no reason to do that. My thumbprint is not going to change right in that second, right? It does that. I've actually never checked why it does it. This is why I assume it does it, but it does that because if it only takes one image of my thumbprint, right, then it's perfectly possible, right? So let's say scanner isn't super accurate, right? It's perfectly possible that if I place my thumbprint on that scanner later, the thumbprint is going to look a little different from the picture that was stored in the database, or the data stored in the database. And if I do that, then, when I'm trying to punch in, then it's not going to work, right? It's going to say, I don't know this person, even though I'm actually the same person who should be matched up to that particular print in the database, right? So how do people generally solve this problem, or engineers solve this problem? Well, they want you to take multiple prints. So when I keep putting my thumbprint on the scanner, it's actually collecting information from different angles and different perspectives, right? And it asks me probably to take every place is different. Probably I'd have to do 3 or 4 or something like that. And now that it's caught my fingerprints from different angles and perspectives, now the presumption is that it's always going to look the same to the scanner, right? In a way that it could be matched up with information database and be registered as me, right? So I could place it on this angle, right? And the database will say, oh, that's me. I can place it on this angle or that angle, and no matter which one I do, it's going to recognize me, even though they look slightly different to the scanner, right? And that's basically the same solution that we're going to use for the subconscious mind. So before I go over that, I just want to go over this point. So the goal, in order to basically solve that problem of the subconscious not recognizing the activity from different perspectives, your goal is to actually keep entering a transcendental state while performing an activity from multiple subconscious perspectives, right? Because like I said, when playing basketball, there are many different circumstances within the activity of playing basketball that all look very different to the subconscious. So your best bet is to just charge or keep going in and out of a transcendental state from each one of those different perspectives. So you want a whole bunch of variety, right? So if I go in and out of a transcendental state while shooting 3-pointers, I'm going to charge a subconscious path for shooting 3-pointers. If I go in and out of a transcendental state while playing defense, then I'm going to charge a subconscious path for defense. If I go in and out of a transcendental state for dunking, right, I'm going to charge a subconscious path for dunking. And so if I keep doing that from all the different angles and perspectives and circumstances of the activity of playing basketball, then what's going to happen? Well, eventually a very special thing happens, which I'm going to go over that here. Eventually, many subconscious paths will form in subconscious memory, and one will be available for each of the different perspectives of the subconscious. So in other words, you can almost imagine, actually I'm going to talk about it a little later, I forgot. I was going to draw a diagram, but now I want to talk about when we talk about, we're going to compare subconscious paths to neural networks in your brain. But suffice it to say, you can imagine almost like multiple paths, right, developing in your subconscious memory. And like I said, when I shoot 3-pointers or do 2-pointers or dunk or do a pick and roll or do an alley-oop or play defense or try to steal the ball, if I've charged so many subconscious paths from all these different perspectives, then there's always going to be at least one path that's called for any activity or any perspective. And so what that means in the end is that I'm pretty much going to be able to perform transcendentally for the whole activity, right? So no matter during the entire time that I'm playing basketball, I will be able to stay in a transcendental state, which means I'll be able to continuously perform at a transcendental level because there's always some subconscious path guiding me and giving me an urge to do this and do that and do this, and I'll be able to play with my positive mind. So in other words, you want to have as many subconscious paths as possible for some activity in order to maintain a transcendental level of performance, right? And so that's actually the main solution to the drop-off problem we talked about in, I think the second video after the intro, right? So we're saying that in order to charge the subconscious to perform transcendentally, we'll need to learn how to charge, we'll need to learn how to charge the subconscious to feel an emotion, but then maintain the intensity of that emotion while interacting with the environment and different people and things like that, right? And so as you can see, that's very difficult to do, right, with a single subject. So that's why and I pretty much said it before, but that's why the charging framework of subconscious memory, we talked about in all the chapters before this chapter, were insufficient, right? It wasn't good enough, right? It wasn't complete enough to talk about how to do this. But now that we've come up with the idea of subconscious paths, we now have the framework to figure out how to do that, right? So if you have so many subconscious paths for every possible circumstance that you could find yourself in, more specifically, each one of the different perspectives the subconscious might have while you're performing an activity, then it's going to be able to call some path, and you'll be able to stay in a transcendental state, which also means you'll be able to maintain some degree of emotional intensity. We'll talk more about the energy component of that because that's important here too. We'll talk about that, I think, in the next video. We're going to talk about what it means to deep charge subconscious paths, because we haven't gone over that yet. But yeah, that's basically the solution, right, to the drop-off problem, and that's how you really charge the subconscious for transcendental performance, right? So this is the more complete picture. And that, like I said, that's also why a single subconscious path just isn't going to work, right? If you one path will only help you for one perspective of an activity. The activity is clearly going to look very different from multiple perspectives to the subconscious, even though to the conscious mind it all looks the same, like one activity. And to go over this last point here, I defined the term or the concept of what I call subconscious universality, right? Or just universality for short. So what that means is that term refers to the degree to which the subconscious can recognize an activity from its different perspectives and call a subconscious path to enable transcendental performance for each one of those perspectives. So in other words, the more universality a transcendental performance charge has, the higher your subconscious affinity is for enabling you to stay within a transcendental state while, or maintain its volatility while you're performing an activity. Right? So I know it's kind of a mouthful, but that is the complete definition. I'm not sure if I can make a shorter definition for it. But suffice it to say, and I guess a shorter, more layman's terms way of saying it would be, it defines the degree to which you can maintain subconscious volatility while performing an activity, right? So if you, like I said, if you only have a little bit of universality, then you're going to experience the drop-off problem in certain situations. So maybe I have a subconscious path for this part of playing basketball, and this part, my subconscious recognizes it. But when I go into this new part or this new circumstance, there's no path called, so emotions just drop off. Now I'm back to a negative or normal level of performance using my negative mind. So generally when you're performing, when you're charging the subconscious for performance, you want to get a good chunk of universality, right? And this is actually demonstrated in sports. So a lot in sports, let's take boxing, right? You want to generally practice or spar against different types of opponents, right? You don't want to get used to just one type of opponent. Why is that? That's because you're going to start to develop subconscious paths just for that type of opponent. And you're going to limit the subject and the category of, you're going to limit the subject and category that's going to allow your subconscious path to be called, but also the activity itself. Like I said, to the conscious mind, the activity is always boxing, right? But to the subconscious, the activity will look a little different if you fight against someone who has a different style, right? So if you practice against one type of style, you're going to charge a whole bunch of subconscious paths for that style. This moment you get to a new style that you've never seen before, your subconscious isn't going to have any path charge for it, so nothing's going to be called. You're not going to be able to perform transcendentally, and you'll be at a negative or a normal level of performance. So, and this is something that boxers are subconsciously aware of, right? So they want to train against multiple different types of opponents. They want variety. And the idea is that when they fight some random opponent, right, let's say they're a pro boxer or even amateur boxer, and they fight some random opponent they're not familiar with, there's not a lot of video footage on them, they'll still be able to perform well at them even with an unexpected style. That's possible if they have a lot of universality, right, in their subconscious paths, or for the transcendental performance charge related to the activity of boxing, right? So you see that all the time in sports, this same principle. When I was, I talk about this example in the book. So I talked about when I charged my subconscious to sing, right? I talked about that in chapter 3, right? So chapter 3, chapter 3, I'm thinking, but I charged my subconscious to sing. Now, how did I do that? I was producing some intention, right? The intention to feel more emotion while I sung, which, like I said, you could pick different types of intentions for transcendental performance. For that one, I picked that. And what actually was happening is I kept going in and out of a transcendental state while I was singing, right? Which I don't even think I knew that at the time, but I was just trying to feel more emotion. But what was actually ended up happening, because I kept singing the same song over and over, I charged a subconscious path for the song, right? But what's interesting is that when I would sing other songs, basically before I say that, I'll just say that when I charged the subconscious path, that enhanced my singing ability, right? So I was singing at a transcendental level, or a transcendental level for me, right? But what's interesting is that when I sung other songs, right, I couldn't sing them as well, but it was still a little bit well. It was still a little bit better than I would have been able to sing if I hadn't charged that those subconscious paths for that one song at all, right? And so what happens? That means that for those other songs, the subconscious paths that I charged for that original song were called a little bit, right? So they were called a little bit, and that helped with my performance a little bit. So they had some degree of universality for that song, right? But they didn't have universality for other songs. So this was something that never occurred to me, right? Because I didn't understand this theory, right? But this is actually how it works. You can charge your subconscious you can charge subconscious paths to be really good at singing a specific song. So if it has a lot of universality for that song, right? No matter which part of the song I'm at, the chorus, if I'm at some certain parts of a song are kind of hard to sing. Everybody's voice is a little different. Some people might have an easy time singing this part of the song. Other people have a hard time, right? So, but if you charge enough paths, you could just, the whole song is, you could handle this part, you can handle that part, you can handle that part, and you can sing it all transcendentally, right? But that's not going to help you with other songs, right? Because they're not close enough to that original subconscious path, so they don't get called as well. And this was, when I learned this was actually kind of what I now think about really good singers. What really good singers actually do is they keep practicing all different types of styles of singing, right? In different types of, I don't know, different parts of the song and things like that. So eventually, these are the really good singers who practice it a lot. They develop in their subconscious mind universality for all different types of songs, right? And so they can sing almost any song at a transcendental level. Now we're going to talk about deep charging in the next video. We're going to talk about the long-term effects of a subconscious path, which is very similar to what we spoke about before with subjects. But for the moment, this is just my belief, is that good or great singers, they have a huge amount of paths charged up for singing. That's why they can sing all types of songs so well. So when people look at them, they think that it's something they're doing like in the moment, right? Intellectually to be good at singing. No, they're relying on their past subconscious charges, because their subconscious is full of subconscious paths that help them to charge. That's how they can do it so smoothly, right? So easily, and sing all these songs, right? And someone looking at them who doesn't understand this, at least this is my theory, right? So someone looking at them might just think, oh, there's, like I said, there's something intellectually they're doing to be good, and that we're all starting from the same place in singing. If I can just intellectually figure it out, right, then I can sing just as good as them. No, right? So like I said, they're relying on these subconscious and these subconscious charges, right? You have to charge that network of subconscious paths within your subconscious memory, right? And then you'll have all these paths to help you perform transcendentally. So that's actually very similar to what I was saying about intelligence, right? When it comes to studying math, right? Well, we haven't gone over the organization patterns yet, because that's kind of what I was talking about with math. But still, if you don't go through the work, right, of studying math in a very intense and rigorous way, you're not going to have those subconscious paths to help you understand math and process it later, right? Don't look at someone who can process it like that and think, well, you can do the same thing without having gone through the work of studying, right? If you just intellectually sort of do certain things, you can get it. No, right? Like I said, it's a little bit more than that in this case, because what I'm actually talking about is organization. But still, I think you get the point, right? Charging subconscious paths for performance is very important, right? And you want to really focus on the quality of universality, right? Otherwise, you'll just constantly have the drop-off problem, and you won't be able to perform transcendentally. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say. I could talk about conversation. I feel like I already brought the point home. I'll just say very quickly, so when I used to charge my subconscious I used to charge it to try to enter a transcendental level of performance with entertainment and conversation and kind of making people laugh and things like that. So this same principle was at play. I needed to develop a lot of universality, right, for my transcendental performance charge. So I needed to be good at making conversation with this type of person and that type, because people have different personalities, right? It's different. It's a little different from talking to guys versus when I'm talking to girls. If I'm talking to a young girl versus an older, like everyone is a little bit different. If I'm talking to them at work or outside of work, if I'm talking to them in a crowd, I've done that before too, right? Every circumstance is a little different, right? So I need to charge my subconscious in a way where I have a lot of universality, right? So I can handle all of these circumstances, right? And maintain a transcendental performance charge in all of them, because there's some subconscious path in my memory that's going to help me no matter what different perspective I try to entertain them in. Oh, one last thing. I'm kind of beating a dead horse a little bit, but one last thing I want to mention that I think is useful to bring up here, I actually forgot to mention it last video, is I remember this comedian, right? I forgot her name. She, I think she went on stage, right? So she went on stage and she wanted to do stand-up, and she didn't do very well, right? So a lot of people were kind of, disappointed with her and judging her and things like that. But one might ask, like, did she prepare? Did she plan it? Like, what did she do, right? And why did it turn out so bad? Well, like I said, I don't like to toot my own horn, but like I always feel like I can look at something and just completely analyze what's going on a subconscious level. I've been doing this too long, right? So what actually happened on the subconscious level, this is what I think happened, is she was very good at making people laugh in person, right? And she probably had she wrote her own routine and things like that, and she was very good at it. But what she realized is that when you're on stage, right, doing basically a comedy monologue, it's completely different, right, from doing it in person, right? And so, in other words, she may have a lot of subconscious paths for making people laugh and making jokes when you're talking to someone in person. But she didn't have any, let me put it another way. Those same subconscious paths weren't called as well to the activity of being on stage because it looks too different to the subconscious mind. So she had to rely more on her negative mind or a normal performance level, which is always very bad, right? Not to mention, because it's probably was a new situation for her. Her subconscious charged very easily, perhaps at a negative frequency or anxiety frequency, which also blocked her transcendental performance. It blocked her from performing transcendentally in a good way, right? So there's one more example I just remembered to give, which I also forgot to give last video. Okay, this is the last one, because like I said, I know I'm beating a dead horse like crazy. But the last example I'm going to give is another circumstance that I noticed. Like I said, I can look at people and I just immediately know not immediately, but a lot of times I feel like I know what's going on subconsciously. So I'm just kind of sharing with you guys stuff that goes through my mind all the time, because I'm always analyzing what's going on a subconscious level when I see things. So there was a politician, right? I think she was a politician. She ran for some seat, some office in Congress. I think she didn't get it, right? And I think she had one before, though. I'm not sure. But the one I'm thinking about, she didn't get it, right? And then she went on this TV show or this news show. And she kept, I saw this immediately, right? Because like I said, I know what's going on with this stuff. So she was very good at giving campaign speeches and speeches to crowds and things like that. But then she switched to going on a talk show. Well, not a talk show, like a news show, right? And what she was doing, and I peeped this, she kept using her same sort of performance when she's giving campaign speeches. She tried to use those same sort of skills when delivering the news. And I was like, that's completely not going to work. I knew it wasn't going to work, right? There's no chance that's going to work. Because what she's doing is she's thinking that those same subconscious, she's not thinking this on a conscious level, but she's in a sense thinking that those same subconscious paths which help her to speak and deliver a message, she's trying to rely on them because they're already charged, right? She uses them all the time for what she's actually really good at. She was trying to use those same paths for delivering the news. So she's delivering the news like she's giving a speech. And I'm like, it's a completely different environment, right? It's a much longer form type of, I don't know what the word is, but it's much longer form consumption for a consumer or someone watching something, right? So giving someone giving them their attention, but it's a much longer form compared to someone on stage, right? Giving a speech or campaign speech, and it's persons just at home on their phone or on the computer, right? And there are hundreds of other sort of news talk shows to watch online. Right? So you have to be much more captivating and interesting and other types of things to keep a person watching. You absolutely cannot use those types of subconscious paths, right? So remember what I said. You can use different intentions to reach a transcendental level of performance. So she's using the intentions that she really used for campaign speeches. she's using the same charges that came from that type of intention for another circumstance, which is that's a terrible intention to use for transcendental performance in that circumstance. And I was like, this is completely not going to work, right? And then she didn't do well. I was like, I called it immediately. I knew that was going to happen because I have experience charging these types of subconscious paths related to entertaining others and making people laugh and trying to actually engage with them. So I know what's involved in the process. And we're going to talk about organizational patterns, right? They're I don't want to use the word difficult, but they're tricky to charge, right? They're very tricky, right? So I knew the only reason I figured it out is because I put so much effort, right, into trying to create a theory on how to be entertaining. And I'm like I consider myself to kind of be a natural theoretician, right? So you probably get that sense from here. Whether, you might agree with this stuff or not, I'm just like kind of a theory junkie, right? I'm always making theory, always been that way since I was a kid. But like during those years ago, all those years ago, I kept trying to create a theory on how to be entertaining. So it took a lot of work, but I understood it after a while. And I'm like, I don't think she's going to do all that work. Not everyone, can do that, right? Just like there's a lot of things I can't do. That's just one of the things I think, to be good at. And so I figured she's probably not going to go through all that work. So she's just she's not going to go through the work to make new subconscious paths that actually favor the circumstance. So she's just going to use her existing subconscious paths because the activity looks close enough to the subconscious mind so she can still use those paths when delivering the news. And it completely didn't work, right? So that's just something I thought was interesting to talk about in terms of subconscious paths. Something I forgot to mention last video. So that's just a way of thinking of subconscious paths that's kind of important, right? You really want to make sure that the intention you've used, right, for some activity fits the activity, right? So if you try to go to a new situation and use these subconscious paths for a previous situation, it might not be that great. Not only is the subconscious not always going to be able to call it that well, but it might not even make sense for that particular activity, right? So, but yeah, I think that's it. I think the horse is like super, like really dead now. So in the next video, we're going to now talk about what it means to deep charge subconscious paths, because it's a little different from deep charging emotions, right? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.